Hi, welcome back. In the session today, we are going to see how we can create relationships among the different database tables and database models that we previously created. Relational databases, if you don't know much about them, I would suggest and recommend that you go and read. The web is an excellent way to get this type of information. So I strongly recommend that you go ahead and read about relational databases and most importantly on how to write them with SQL. As far as calligraphy is concerned, calligraphy gives you a set of methods and properties that can help you easily query and easily create this type of relationships. Now, why do we want to create relationships among different tables? It is very normal in any sort of application in order to query the database in a most efficient way to create this type of relationships among tables. So if I were to take examples that we've seen in this video before, what do we mean by relationships? So far we created a database table called posters and another database table called users, but so far there hasn't been any connection among these two tables. So if for whatever reason we want to define that every poster that we have in our system belongs to one and only one user, then in that case we need to define what we call a relationship. And if we want this, similarly, if we want to every record or every poster record to have many users, then also this is a relationship that needs to be defined. The better way to see all this is to directly jump into the code and illustrate that for you. And we will do this in this session. But before I go to the code, I would like to point out where in the documentation you can find the section that we're going to be talking about today. That section is called Relationships. So if you go in there, you will see an exhaustive and an extensive documentation that defines the three types of relationships that can happen with calligraphy. The first relationship is what we call a one-to-one relationship. So going back to the example, what is a one-to-one relationship? A one-to-one relationship is if I want every poster that I have to have one and only one user, and vice versa. So for every user, I want to have one and only one poster. That's a one-to-one relationship. The second type of relationship that is supported by calligraphy is what we call a one-to-many relationship. A one-to-many relationship is if I want one poster to have many users, but I want every user to have only one poster, or vice versa. In the case of our examples, we're going to do the other way around. So we want to make sure that for a poster, there's only one and only one user, and for a user, we can have multiple posters. So that's what a one-to-many or a many-to-one relationship is. A third type of relationship is what we call a many-to-many relationship. In a many-to-many relationship, every poster has many users and every user has many posters. Okay? What we're going to see in the session today, we are going to build together a one-to-many relationship and a many-to-many relationship. We will not be building a one-to-one relationship because it is very similar to the one-to-many. The one-to-many is slightly more complex, so this is why we want to do it in a video. But if you understand the one-to-many, then you can very easily create a one-to-one. Okay, and then we'll show the many-to-many as well. Now, something to know about the one-to-many and the one-to-one relationships. This kind of relationship to be implemented, there is a notion of foreign key that we need to understand. A foreign key, when we're talking about relational databases, is a key that gets added to a table to indicate that that table can have only one record from another table. Okay, what that foreign key is just like any key. It's an index that will reference a record in the other table. Okay, this is really what it is. Now, since calligraphy does not provide methods or ways to create databases or to do any SQL scripting, for the one-to-one and the one-to-many relationship, you will need to make changes to the SQL scripts that you create to create the tables, okay? And I will show you how to do this when we get to the code. However, for the many-to-many relationship, the way it's done in relational databases in general is that there is a new table or an interim table that is created, and that table we call it the pivot table. And what that table does, it's going to have one-to-many relationships to the other two parties involved in the relationship. Now, Calligraphy does all this automatically for you. So whenever you're building a many-to-many relationship, or rather defining a many-to-many relationship in Calligraphy, you do not need to do any database modifications. Okay? Now let's go and jump into the code. And we're going to start by building a one-to-many relationship. And like I said previously, for a one-to-many or for a one-to-one, we need to make modification to the SQL statement in order to change the way the table is defined by adding this foreign key that we talked about earlier. So here is the script that we created to create the database table called posters. What we first need to do is we need to add a new index or a new property in that table that we're going to call user ID. Notice that I chose to uh, to call it user underscore ID, with user being singular, despite the fact that the table is called users. So this is a convention that Calligraphy uses out of the box. So if you want to use the methods as is with their default values, then in that case you need to follow that convention. If you make any modification and you decide to call it something completely different, then you might need to define to add this as an argument. The name of the key, you need to add it as an argument to the methods that are used to define the relationship. Okay, but to make things easier, let's follow the convention. So we need to add a user ID that would be an int, and we're going to default it to null really initially. In an ideal world, you would probably want this to be not null, you would want it to be unique, but just to simplify the exercise that we're doing here, let's just say that it's defaulted to none. Okay, why? Because we do want to create posters without necessarily assigning them yet to users. So in that case, in order to achieve that, we can allow it to be a non-required field by defaulting it to a null value. Great. So now we need a way to tell this SQL that this is a foreign key and that this foreign key references something in the users table. So how do we do that? In order to do that, there is a statement in SQL called foreign key, like that. Okay. And for this foreign key, we need to define the name of the attribute or the property that is the foreign key. So it's a user ID in this case. And we need to define what it references. And it references the users table. And what particularly in the users table, it's going to reference the ID of the users table. So this statement creates automatically for you a foreign key to the users table. Now, when for MySQL in particular, we might want that every time we delete a poster, for any associated users with that poster to be automatically removed from the database. If we want to achieve that, we need to create what we call a constraint in MySQL. That constraint has a name. So in our particular case, we're going to say it's a foreign key user and a poster. Okay, you can give it any name that you want. And what we want to define is that on either update or delete, we want this to cascade. So in case I update or in case I delete a record in the poster table, I want those changes to take effect on the user table as well. Okay, and this is exactly the statement that will allow us to do this. Once we're done with this, then our table is ready. So now what we need to do, we need to go back to phpMyAdmin, or the terminal if you have been using the MySQL terminal, and I go to the database that we created earlier called posters, and I deleted the posters tables that we used to have because now we need to import it again. So let's go ahead and import that table again, which happens to be here in my case, and then let's import. If I go back here, the posters table got added. Let's look at the structure to make sure that we have a user ID now. And notice how phpMyAdmin adds an indicator to say that this is a key that references, if you look further down, it references another table, and that key can be null as well. Okay, so it seems to be fine. Now let's go to our code again. We can close this file if we don't want it. And what we need to do now is change the model. Why? Because we added something to the model. And what we added is this user ID property. So we need to have it available to us in the model as well. Great. Now, how do we create the relationship? How do we tell Caligraphy that we need a one-to-many relationship with the users table? For that, there is a bunch of methods which are described in the documentation, and the one-to-many relationship method, there are two of them. Okay, to establish a one in one direction, the one relationship, we need to create a function that tells this model that it has one user. Okay, so how do we do this? There is a function called has1. Okay, it's as easy as that. So what we're going to do, we're going to call a function, and that function is going to be user, but you can call it whatever you want. It would be good to follow the convention if it's a one relationship to have it singularized, and if it's a many relationship to have it pluralized. Okay, that will help you help make your code a little more understandable. So in this particular case, we're going to call public function user, and what this is going to return, we're going to apply a has1 method to this model, and the has1 takes two parameters. It takes the model that we're applying it to, and then it takes the table associated with it. So what this one is doing, it's telling me that poster has one user. Okay, and every time I call this function, that relationship is established. Great. Now let's go take a look at what can be done on the user side if, for whatever reason, every time we get a user, we're also gonna want to get all the posters that come with that user. In order to do that, we need to create, I will delete this and do it again with you. We need to create a same function, but this time it's pluralized because a user has many posters based on the definition that we want to create, and then we are going to return this has many, right? Because a user has many posters. So we're going to add the model poster and then the table associated with it, which is the pluralized posters. This defines our two relationships from both ends. Okay, on the end of the user, a user has many posters, and on the end of the poster, a poster has one user. Great. Now let's go to the controller to see how we could use these functionalities. So we need to create a function. Let's call it getUser, because it's only one user that we can get for a poster. Okay. First, we need to do the association, and we need to associate with the poster in our case. Okay, like that. And what we need to do is, for the model that is contained within the controller, we want to look in the posters table and find the ID that we provide in the URI. Okay, great. Now that we found our model, what we need to do is we need to apply user function to it, and we're going to see what that user function is going to return. Okay, let's create our route in order for us to test. Remember, when we're creating our route, we need to make sure to pass on the ID of that poster. Okay, and we're going to say we want to get the user of this poster, and we're going to say poster controller at getUser, I believe we called the function. Great. Now, so far, we do not have any posters, right? So if I go back here and I run, yes, our posters are empty. So let's call one of the functions that we added last time, which is the add function, in order for us to add, a couple of users in there, of posters in there. So if I go in there now, I have two posters. Great. One of them has ID 1 and the other one has ID 2. Okay. So if they have ID1 and ID2, then in that case, if I do 1 or 2 here and I do user, ideally it should return the user for that function. And if you notice, there is none. Okay, so the ID is none. And why? Because there are no users associated with these posters, or at least none has been established yet. So in order for us to do that in a quick way, of course, is to go to the PHP myadmin and do that association. So in there, I do have the 2 posters, and now notice under the user ID foreign key, nothing has been specified. So let's go ahead and edit this, and let's create or add that relationship, which, by the way, you can very much do it using the controller by doing it in a code fashion. But just to accelerate the process, we're doing it directly in the database. Okay, so let's go and associate this one to our user number 3. And okay, great, this has been associated. So now if I go here and I execute the exact same URI, ideally, since I associated this poster, I now see my user. Okay, so now what this is telling me, it's returning the user that is associated with this poster. Awesome. Now let's go to poster controller again, and notice if I go back here that it's returning the object. Okay, so basically I could get any value that I want out of this. So for example, I could go ahead and say get me just the ID for this poster, for this user, and I get just the ID. Okay, so this is how we do it in one direction. Now let's try to do the opposite, since we already defined the function. So let's define a function get posters, but this time we need to apply it to the user. Okay, and now remember when I used to tell you that the context is extremely important? In this case, we are going to apply it to users, right? Because we're looking at the users table. And what we're going to do, we're going to immediately hard code the value in here. So we're going to say this model is equal to find a user that has an ID 3, okay, because we know that it's already in the database, so it's going to return a user model for us. For that user model, what we are going to do is we're going to get the posters, and we're going to dump that value. And here we go. So let's go and create a route that gives us these posters. So we're going to do route get ID. Oh, we don't need the ID in this case. Why? Because we hard-coded the value. And let's call it /users maybe. Yep. Okay. And then poster controller at get posters. All right. Let's go here. Let's do /users. Here we go. So for that, for user 3, because this is the one that we're looking for, it is getting me all the posters associated with this user, which happens to be 1. Let's go back to the database and add and also assign this poster to our user. So let's go and do an edit, and we're going to assign that one to our user 3 as well. And do a go. Now, ideally, if everything is working fine, it's returning 2 posters for me for that user. Okay, let's go and add more. So let's do add. Now we added another one. If I refresh here, now I have 2 more entries in here. Okay, why? Because in our function we're calling it twice. So let's go here and let's do associate it as well with number 3. And ideally now, if I go back to my code and I do users, it returns 3 posters for that user. Okay, so this is how we create a one-to-many relationship, and the one-to-one is exactly the same process, except you have to call the has1 twice on both tables, and then you got to make sure to have the foreign keys on both tables as well. Okay, this is the only difference between the two. Now let's go ahead and start creating our many-to-many relationship. Remember, in order to create a many-to-many relationship, we do not need to do any modification to the database. All we need to do is to act on the model. So let's go in here and say, I want my poster to have many users. Now don't worry, this will not conflict with what we had earlier because they use different different ways to query the tables. Okay, the many-to-many does not need any foreign keys associated with, or at least they're not the same as the ones associated with the user. In an ideal world, of course, you do not want this to happen. You have to define from the beginning what type of relationship two tables need to have. Ideally, you should avoid conflicts of that kind. But for the purpose of this video, it's a good practice just to see them together. All right, so let's create now a pluralized version of that function, and this time it is not going to use the has methods, but rather it's going to use the belongs to many method. What the belongs to many method does is it's gonna automatically create a pivot table among the posters table and any other table that we define in here. In our particular case, it's going to be the users table. So this will create our pivot table, and it will create a many-to-many relationship. Similarly, now on the user side, if and only if you want the users to have access to all the posters, we're going to say it's many posters for this one, just to differentiate it from the other one. And we're going to return $this, and same thing. It's the same type of relationship. It will be the belongs to many, and it will belong to many posters. All right, now that we have this set, let's go to our controller and see how we could do that. So we're going to do a public function, and we're going to get users in a plural fashion. We're going to associate that. So $this associate with poster, and then posters. Okay. And similarly to what we did earlier, we are going to do this model, and we're going to find the value from the request of that particular poster that we're looking at. And what we are going to do in the beginning, we are going to dump this model, and it's going to be users in the plural. Okay. And I will show you what happens at first, and then we'll make modifications to make it match the use case that we're trying to cover. So ideally, this should do it. Okay, so let's go and create a route now. And we're going to say it's the same thing. It's going to be slash, let's say, poster in this particular case. Oh, no, slash ID. We need to get the ID, right? So slash ID. And what are we going to do with this ID? We want to get all the users with an S for that ID. Get users. Here we go. Okay, so let's go in here. And now what you will notice, let's go get some IDs. So we have 1 to 4 for the posters. Let's take ID 1, and let's say users. It's empty. Okay, despite the fact that we had several foreign keys associated, it does not take them into account. This is why I was telling you earlier that it doesn't use the same methodologies. The many-to-many, it does not have 4 direct foreign keys among the tables. It uses a separate element, which is a pivot table that gets created automatically for you that will do the many-to-many relationship. So let me go and show you that pivot table directly in the database. If I refresh the page here, you will notice that there was a new there's a new table that got added called posters users. And if we look at what this table has, it has pointers to a poster ID and to a user ID. Okay, so every record in that table is a combination of a poster ID and a user ID, which gives you this potential of having a many-to-many relationship. Why? Because every record can have any poster ID here with any user ID. So it does the combinations, the different sorts of combinations, thus creating a many-to-many relationship. So now what we need to do is we need to add some values to this. And Caligraphy comes pre-packaged with a method or with a set of methods that allow you to do this type of things. So let me actually let's do this. So let's do this slash model, And now what we need to do is, for this model in particular, okay, we are going to attach. And what are we going to attach? We need to name the table to which we are attaching, or from which we're attaching, and then we're going to say we want to attach it to user number 3. Okay, this will attach user number 3 to the poster. And which poster are we talking about? The one that we mentioned in the request. So that would be poster ID 1 in our case. Okay, so let's go and see what happens. Of course, nothing will get updated in here, but let's go take a look at the database. And if I go to poster user, notice now I have a new entry in here that tells me that I associated poster 1 with user 3, which is exactly what we wanted. So now if I refresh this again, ideally it should show me this user that we just added or just attached. Now let's attach another user. So let's also attach user number 4 to this. Same thing, but we're going to do 4. Okay, and let's call that method again. Of course, nothing happens the first time. Refresh it again, and here we go. Now I have 2 users, and notice how I get the complete object within. So now what I could do after I attach for my model, if I want to get the users, what I could do is call these user functions again, and then say, so now I have an array. I have to go through each and every one of them. But let's say for the first one that you find, I want you to get the ID, for example. And here we go. We got our ID for our first user. So this is, very basic on how we could create very quickly this type of relationship without having to do our own joining of tables and things like that. Calligraphy comes pre-packaged with these functionalities that do all that work for us. And this is the beauty of using a framework in the first place, is that you don't have to worry about doing the basic SQL statements on your own, or even the most complex ones, such as joining tables and things like that. Just by simply defining the relationships correctly, you are able to use the out-of-the-box functionalities the way you intend to use them. I guess with this, we hope that you have a clear understanding of what relationships are, but most importantly on how to use them with calligraphy. Definitely go ahead and practice a little bit. On how you could use that. Notice that one table can have several, has manys and belongs to and has ones, so it can have any relationship with any other table within the database for as long as it's one type per table. Okay, in our case, we just wanted to demonstrate a little bit the relationship, but in an ideal world, for a more structured code, a cleaner code, you would probably want to have one type of relationship defined, either a one-to-one or a one-to-many or a many-to-many. With that, we hope you enjoyed what we showed you today, and we wish you a great day.